Hi, today I'll be showcasing Know Your Risk, an interactive tool developed for the HCI Assess exercise. We've made the application with the purpose of informing the general public about how some regular activities are ranked in terms of their risk factor. There's a lot of misinformation about how safe certain activities are, and the reasoning is why some are more regulated by the current tier system. This application is an interactive way to make people more aware of the factors that make an activity risky. When the user enters the web page, they're introduced with a landing screen which contains a brief description of the tool and how to interact with it. Here you can see our graph that ranks from low risk up to high risk, and an activity here for the user to drag onto the graph. This is their way of inputting their opinion about the risk level of the activity. They are provided with a brief description of the activity at the left here, as we wanted to keep the descriptions as short as possible on the objects themselves. This description here allows the user to then make their decision more firmly, while also creating a link between the shortened description on the object itself and what the activity actually entails. So the user drags this onto the graph and decides where they think it is in terms of its risk factor. They will then repeat this process, forming rankings of how the activities on the graph are in terms of their risk along the x-axis. We use colour here to provide a visual cue of how risky the activity is as it is being placed. We find that this method of visualization to provide greater distinction between objects than with position alone. We adopted a continuous approach to placing the objects, as we found that in previous iterations of our application using discrete buckets, like so you'd have 1 bucket, 2 bucket, 3, 4, or maybe just 3, we found that users became frustrated when one of the activities sat between those buckets. We implemented this by using 20 zones within the graph, so there are actually 20 underlying buckets here, and this allowed us to more easily calculate the average scores, and we created this continuous feel for the user visually through smooth motion and color blending when dragging. This allows for a greater level of variation between our user responses as well, which allows us to have more honest and representative data. After the user has formed all of their rankings, they have the option to compare them both with the medical recommendations and the average opinions of all of the users who have taken part in this activity so far. We decided to make these comparisons separate to prevent visual clutter and avoid an abundance of elements on the screen at one time. We found that including comparisons between all 3 types of data could be confusing for users to keep track of what's being displayed. So if we click on the Compare with Others button, we're presented with a pop-up telling the user that they can now hover over the activities to reveal additional information. This pop-up ensures that users do not feel lost when they're comparing their answers, as hovering is not always intuitive. It is, however, a powerful way of revealing data, as it allows us to keep the website clean and only show what is relevant to the user. You can see now that all of the user rankings have gone semi-opaque, so that when you hover over an individual activity, it is highlighted, immediately bringing the user's attention to whichever element they're wanting to review, as well as a box here, which displays the average user's opinion for the activity. To generate and display the average user's opinions for this prototype, we aggregated all of the user's choices throughout our iterative evaluations and took the average score for each answer and positioned it at the top of the graph manually ourselves. Now we're going to click on the Compare with Medical button, and we see that much like with the Compare with Others button, the circles go semi-opaque, and when we hover over one, additional information is presented at the top. This is to ensure consistency between both buttons. When you hover over an activity, the information shown is the reasoning why the medical opinion has ranked that activity as risky as it has. So I hope that has provided you with a comprehensive overview of our application, and you can see how we utilize our interactive graph to help inform users about activities as they relate to both the medical opinion on the risk of spreading coronavirus and also the opinion of their fellow users. The information provided back to us by the users is also beneficial due to the ability to gauge public perceptions of activity risk levels. So this average, for example, may be of use to governing bodies to further identify public opinion on COVID. We look forward to answering any questions you may have surrounding our implementation or any justifications for certain design decisions that we've made. Thank you very much.